A compassionate billionaire saves a black mother from the streets. As they await DNA results for her twins, tension builds. What surprising truth will the test uncover, and how will it impact their newfound relationship? And if you cherish your family and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. The vastness of Ethan Hawthorne's mansion only emphasized his solitude. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his study, watching rain streak down the glass while holding an untouched glass of scotch. The room around him contained all the markers of success: rare first editions behind glass, original artwork on the walls, and furniture worth more than most cars. Yet none of it filled the emptiness that had taken root in his chest decades ago. His phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. James Morrison, his attorney, was calling again about the downtown shelter project. Ethan let it ring 4 times before answering, his voice carrying the weight of generational wealth and careful education. "James, I told you I'd think about it. The board meeting is tomorrow, Ethan. They need your answer about the funding." James' voice crackled with barely contained frustration. $5 million is nothing to you, but it could change hundreds of lives. Ethan's mind drifted to his childhood, to empty dining rooms and conversations conducted through staff members. His parents had taught him that money solved problems, but they'd never taught him how to feel fulfilled. "I'll be there," he said finally, ending the call before James could respond. Across town, in an alley between a convenience store and an abandoned office building, Sophia huddled with her twins under a tattered blanket. The cardboard beneath them did little to soften the concrete, but it was dry, and that counted for something. Both children slept, their small bodies curled against her like question marks. A woman passed by the alley entrance, holding the hand of a little boy wearing a bright red coat. The boy was chattering about something, his voice carried despite the rain, and his mother nodded along, smiling down at him. Sophia watched them until they disappeared from view, her throat tight with emotions she couldn't afford to feel. She'd made choices that led here. Bad choices, desperate choices, choices that seemed right at the time, but revealed their poison later. The twins stirred against her, and she pulled them closer, trying to shield them from the world with nothing but her body and determination. The shelter opened at 7. Sophia knew the routine. Line up early, hope for space, accept whatever was offered with gratitude. She'd learned to swallow her pride months ago, when her twins' hunger became louder than her ego. Tonight would be different, though. Tonight, someone new walked through the shelter doors. Ethan arrived at the shelter in his Bentley, feeling immediately out of place. He'd insisted on driving himself, despite his staff's protests. The building was unremarkable: red brick, metal doors, small windows high up the walls. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across worn linoleum floors. The shelter director, a woman named Patricia, led him through the common areas. She spoke about capacity issues and funding needs, but Ethan found himself distracted by the people. They weren't the faceless masses his father had warned him about. They were individuals, each carrying their own story, their own burden. That's when he saw her. Sophia sat at a corner table, helping one twin with a spoonful of soup while the other slept against her shoulder. Something about her posture caught his attention, the careful way she held herself, like someone who refused to be broken by circumstances. Patricia noticed his interest. "That's Sophia. She's been coming here for about 3 months. Smart woman, just had some bad breaks." Ethan watched as Sophia wiped her chill. Dee's mouth with infinite gentleness. "Does she need help?" "They all need help," Patricia answered, but her tone suggested there was more to say. Without fully understanding why, Ethan found himself walking towards Sophia's table. She looked up as he approached, her eyes wary but direct. The sleeping child shifted, and she adjusted automatically, supporting the small head with practiced care. "May I sit?" Ethan asked, gesturing to the empty chair. Sophia studied him for a long moment. Her gaze took in his expensive suit, his carefully groomed appearance, and something else, something that surprised her enough to nod slowly. As he sat down, Ethan realized he had no idea what to say next. All his business training, all his social conditioning, had prepared him for boardrooms and galas. Nothing had prepared him for this moment, for the raw humanity of a mother fighting to keep her children alive. The awake twins stared at him with huge brown eyes, soup forgotten. Sophia remained silent, waiting. In that silence, something shifted in the universe, subtle but significant, like the first crack in a dam. "I'm Ethan," he said finally, his voice softer than usual. "I'd like to help if you'll let me." Sophia's response would alter both their lives forever, though neither of them knew it yet. The weight of unspoken histories, secrets, and future revelations hung in the air between them, invisible but profound. Sophia stood in the entrance of Ethan's guest house, her twins asleep in the portable cribs he'd arranged. The space was larger than any apartment she'd ever lived in, with gleaming hardwood floors and windows that overlooked manicured gardens. Her few possessions fit in a single backpack, now sitting by the door like an escape route. "The kitchen is fully stocked," Ethan explained, maintaining a careful distance. He'd learned in their first week together that Sophia startled at sudden movements, her body tensing like a cornered animal. "Mrs. Reynolds, the housekeeper, can help with anything you need." Sophia ran her hand along the marble countertop, its cool surface grounding her in reality. "Why are you doing this?" The question emerged softer than she intended, heavy with the weight of years spent learning that nothing came without a price. "Because I can," Ethan answered, then grimaced at how that sounded. "I mean, because it's right." He watched her move through the space, noting how she cataloged exits and hiding spots unconsciously. It reminded him of himself as a child, mapping escape routes from his father's anger. The invitation to his monthly dinner party came 3 days later. Sophia initially refused, but Ethan insisted it was important for his business associates to meet the woman helping him develop his new community outreach program. The title was a fiction they both understood, a way to explain her presence that wouldn't raise uncomfortable questions. The night of the party, Sophia wore a dress Ethan's personal shopper had selected. The fabric felt foreign against her skin, the price tag more than she'd ever spent on clothes in a year. Mrs. Reynolds had offered to watch the twins, her kindly face showing no judgment about Sophia's circumstances. Ethan's friends were exactly as Sophia had imagined, polished, educated, and completely removed from the realities of her world. They spoke about vacation homes and private schools, about investments and yacht clubs. Some ignored her completely. Others asked questions that felt like interrogations masked as interest. "And what did you do before joining Ethan's project?" A woman in diamonds asked, her smile not reaching her eyes. Before Sophia could answer, Ethan appeared at her side. "Sophia has valuable insights into community needs that most of us have never considered." His hand found the small of her back, steady and warm. "She's teaching me more than I could learn from 100 consultants." Later that night, after the guests had left, they sat in the kitchen while Mrs. Reynolds hummed lullabies to the twins upstairs. Ethan loosened his tie, looking more human without the armor of his perfect posture. "I'm sorry about Caroline's questions," he said, pouring them both sparkling water. "She's always been racist," Sophia supplied, her voice carrying no anger, just tired recognition. "I was going to say insecure, but yes, that too." He studied his glass. "I grew up with these people. Their prejudices were my prejudices, until they weren't." Sophia leaned back in her chair, really looking at him. "What changed?" "I did," he said simply. "Or I'm trying to. My father built his empire believing that worth was measured by bank accounts and breeding. I used to think that way too, until I realized how empty it left me." The confession hung between them, delicate as spun glass. Sophia thought about her own past, about the choices that had seemed inevitable at the time. "We're all trying to escape something, aren't we?" Ethan's response was interrupted by crying from upstairs. Sophia rose automatically, but he gestured for her to stay. "I'll check on them. You rest." She watched him climb the stairs, his expensive suit incongruous with the task of comforting crying infants. The sight stirred something in her chest, something dangerous and warm that felt too much like hope. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a routine. Mornings were for business, Ethan had actually created a community program, with Sophia providing genuine insight. Afternoons were for the twins, who had begun reaching for Ethan as naturally as they reached for their mother. Evenings were for conversations that grew deeper, more personal, though both still held their darkest secrets close. "Tell me about your parents," Sophia asked one night, after the twins were asleep and the house had settled into quiet. Ethan stared into the garden, where fountains sparkled under landscape lighting. They believed in legacy above all else. The Hawthorne name had to be protected, preserved, elevated. Love was secondary to duty.
He paused.
"I haven't spoken to them in 5 years. Because of business? Because I started questioning things they saw as unchangeable truths." He turned to her. "What about your family?" Sophia's hands tightened around her teacup. "That's a story for another time," she said, and Ethan nodded, respecting the boundary even as questions burned in his mind. They were building something, both of them knew it. Something that defied the expectations of their separate worlds. But beneath the surface, secrets churned like dark water, threatening to rise at any moment. The DNA testing facility occupied the 5th floor of a downtown medical building. Ethan sat in the waiting room, his leg bouncing unconsciously while he checked his phone for the 100th time. The twins were at home with Sophia and Mrs. Reynolds, too young to understand how their lives might change in the coming weeks. The appointment itself had been simple enough to arrange. Money smoothed the way for expedited testing, discreet handling, and private consultation rooms. But no amount of wealth could ease the knot in Ethan's stomach as he filled out paperwork that asked for alleged father instead of just father. Dr. Sarah Chin, the geneticist, explained the process with practice neutrality. "We'll need cheek swabs from you and both children. Results typically take 2 weeks, but given the circumstances, we can expedite to 7 days." She paused, studying Ethan's face. "Mr. Hawthorne, are you certain you want to proceed?" The question caught him off guard. "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" Sometimes, especially in cases where emotional bonds have already formed, people decide that knowing might be more damaging than not knowing. Her voice carried the weight of experience. Once you have these results, you can't unknow them. Ethan thought about the twins, about how Dee started calling him Etten in their toddler voices, about how the boy reached for him during thunderstorms, and how the girl had his same habit of furrowing her brow when concentrating. "I need to know," he said finally. That night, sleep eluded him. He wandered the mansion's halls, ending up in the twins' playroom. Their toys lay scattered across expensive carpets, evidence of lives beginning to take root in his sterile world. A stuffed elephant here, building blocks there, tiny handprints on windows that Mrs. Reynolds hadn't yet wiped away. The sound of footsteps made him turn. Sophia stood in the doorway, wrapped in a robe he'd bought her. "Can't sleep either?" she asked, moving to stand beside him. "I keep thinking about my father," Ethan admitted. About how he measured everything in bloodlines and bank accounts. How he'd react to all this. And how would he react? He'd say, "I'm being naive. That I'm letting emotions cloud my judgment." Ethan picked up the stuffed elephant, straightening its bow tie absently. He'd probably hire private investigators, run background checks, demand prenuptial agreements. Sophia stiffened beside him. "Is that what you're doing?" "No," he answered quickly. "No, I'm not my father." But even as he said it, doubt crept in. Wasn't the DNA test itself a form of investigation? A way to verify, to prove, to know for certain? That night marked a shift in their dynamic. Sophia began having nightmares, waking in cold sweats that she blamed on stress. Ethan noticed how she started taking more phone calls in private, speaking in hushed tones that fell silent when he approached. The twins, sensitive to the changing atmosphere, became clingy. The boy developed a fear of being left alone, screaming whenever Sophia moved out of sight. The girl stopped eating properly, pushing away plates of food she'd previously devoured. Mrs. Reynolds watched it all, with growing concern. One afternoon, while Sophia was napping, she approached Ethan in his study. "Those children need stability," she said, her usual formality softened by genuine worry. "And so does their mother." "I'm trying to provide that," Ethan responded, not looking up from his laptop. Are you? Or are you looking for guarantees in a situation that can't offer any? The question hung in the air like smoke. Later that week, during a rare moment alone, Sophia and Ethan sat in the garden. The twins played nearby, their laughter a counterpoint to the heavy silence between adults. What happens if they're not yours? Sophia asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan watched the children, his chest tight. They're already mine, he said. DNA won't change that. You say that now, but... Sophia trailed off, her eyes distant. People always want certainty. They want to know they're not being fooled, taken advantage of. Is that what you think this is about? You taking advantage of me? Isn't it? A rich, white man rescuing a homeless black woman and her kids? It sounded like the setup to a bad Lifetime movie. Her laugh held no humor, or a tragedy. Before Ethan could respond, the girl fell, scraping her knee. Both adults moved instinctively to comfort her, their previous conversation lost in the immediate need to soothe tears and apply band-aids. But the words lingered between them, adding another layer to the complex web of emotions, doubts, and unspoken fears that grew denser with each passing day. That night, Ethan lay awake, listening to the sounds of his changing household. The twins' soft breathing through the baby monitor. Sophia's footsteps as she paced in her room. The weight of impending truth pressed down on all of them, bending their newly formed family into shapes none of them had anticipated. Word traveled fast in Sophia's old neighborhood. Her sudden elevation from homeless mother to companion of a billionaire sparked conversations in beauty shops, church basements, and community centers. The whispers started small but grew louder with each passing week. Some called her a sellout. Others suggested more sinister arrangements. The weight of judgment pressed against her shoulders whenever she visited her old haunts. Marcus Johnson, who ran the community center where Sophia used to seek shelter, confronted her one afternoon while she was dropping off donations. "You think you're better than us now?" he asked, his voice carrying across the room. "Living in that big house, playing house with Mr. Moneybags." Sophia stood her ground, though her hands trembled. "I'm trying to make a better life for my children. By becoming his charity case? His pet project." Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice. "People like him don't change, Sophia. They use us to feel better about themselves, then discard us when we're no longer entertaining." The conversation haunted her for days, mixing with her own doubts about her place in Ethan's world. She caught glimpses of herself in mirrors and windows, wondering if she recognized the woman in designer clothes who spoke in carefully modulated tones. Ethan, meanwhile, had begun attending community meetings in Sophia's old neighborhood. He sat in metal folding chairs in church basements, listening to discussions about gentrification, police brutality, and systemic inequality. The experience was uncomfortable, often confrontational, but he forced himself to stay, to listen, to learn. During one particularly heated meeting, a young activist named Deshaun Williams called him out directly. "You think showing up here makes you one of us? That throwing money at problems absolves you of responsibility?" "No," Ethan responded, maintaining eye contact. "I'm here because I need to understand." "Understand what?" "How the other half lives." Deshaun's laugh was sharp. "Man, you could lose every penny tomorrow and still have more privilege than anyone in this room." The exchange led to a longer conversation after the meeting, one that stretched late into the night at a local diner. Deshaun challenged every assumption Ethan had about poverty, race, and social justice. "It's not about charity," Deshaun explained, stirring his coffee. "It's about changing the systems that make charity necessary." Ethan found himself returning to these conversations, even as they made him increasingly uncomfortable with his own position in the world. He began questioning business practices he'd previously accepted without thought. The way his company hired, the neighborhoods where they developed properties, the institutions they supported. His board of directors noticed the change. During a quarterly meeting, Richard Sterling, his father's oldest friend, pulled him aside. "Your father built this company understanding that business and social work don't mix," he warned. "These community projects of yours are making shareholders nervous." "Times change," Ethan responded. Maybe we should too. Is this about that woman? Richard's voice hardened. Because if you're letting personal matters cloud your judgment. Her name is Sophia, Ethan interrupted, surprising himself with his anger. And she's helped me see things I should have seen years ago. The tension between his old world and new understanding came to a head at a fundraising gala. Ethan had insisted on hosting it at a community center rather than the usual country club. The event brought together wealthy donors and community activists, creating an atmosphere thick with unspoken tensions. During his speech, Ethan departed from his prepared remarks. "We've been asking the wrong questions," he told the crowd. "We ask how to help communities in need, but we don't ask why these needs exist. We discuss charity while avoiding discussions of justice." From the back of the room, he saw Sophia watching him. Her expression was complex, pride mixed with concern, hope tinged with fear. She understood better than anyone the risks he was taking by challenging the very system that had given him his privilege. Later that night, after the gala, they walked through the neighborhood together. The streets were quiet, but lights still burned in windows, lives being lived behind drawn curtains. "You're making powerful enemies," Sophia observed. "I'm trying to make meaningful change," Ethan responded. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." She stopped walking, turning to face him. "Do you understand what you're risking? Not just your position, but everything you've built. I understand that staying silent is no longer an option." He looked around at the neighborhood, seeing it with new eyes. "But I also understand that I have a lot to learn." The weight of their growing understanding of each other, of the world, of the complexities they faced, settled around them like an invisible cloak. They were changing, both of them, in ways neither had anticipated. And with change came vulnerability, exposure, risk. Jasmine waited outside the community center, leaning against a brick wall with the practiced ease of someone used to going unnoticed. When Sophia emerged from her volunteer shift, Jasmine pushed off the wall, her gold bangles catching the afternoon light. "Long time no see, girl." The sight of her old friend froze Sophia mid-step. Jasmine had been there during the darkest times, when choices weren't really choices at all. They'd run together, survived together, crossed lines together. Now she stood as a living reminder of everything Sophia was trying to leave behind. "I'm clean now, Jazz," Sophia said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I've got my kids to think about." Jasmine's laugh carried the roughness of too many cigarettes. "Clean? Is that what you call living in that white man's house, playing Cinderella?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You really think he's gonna want you once he knows everything? About Kenny? About what we did in Chicago?" The names and places hit Sophia like physical blows. She glanced around, terrified someone might overhear. "That's in the past." "Past has a way of becoming present real quick," Jasmine replied. She pulled out a folded piece of paper, pressing it into Sophia's hand. "Kenny's getting out next month. He's been asking about the twins." Across town, Ethan sat in his private study, staring at his computer screen. The conversation with James, his oldest friend, replayed in his mind. "I had my guys do some digging," James had said, his discomfort evident even over the phone. "There's something you need to know about Sophia's time in Chicago." The information sat in his email inbox, unread. Part of him wanted to delete it, to choose trust over verification. But another part, the part trained by generations of Hawthorne caution, urged him to look. One click could reveal everything, or destroy everything he'd built with Sophia. Instead of opening the email, he found himself scrolling through photos on his phone. The twins at the park, their faces smeared with ice cream. Sophia reading them bedtime stories, her voice changing for each character. Small moments of joy that felt more real than any business deal he'd ever closed. That evening, the mansion's atmosphere grew thick with unspoken words. Sophia moved through dinner mechanically, her mind clearly elsewhere. The twins picked up on her distraction, becoming fussy and difficult. Even Mrs. Reynolds noticed, shooting concerned glances between Sophia and Ethan. "Is everything all right?" Ethan asked after the twins were finally asleep. They stood in the kitchen, the island between them feeling wider than usual. Sophia gripped her tea mug too tightly. "Why wouldn't it be? You seem... He searched for the right word. Distant. Maybe I'm just tired of pretending, she said, then immediately looked like she wanted to take the words back. Pretending what? That this is real. That I belong here. That we're not just playing H. Ooze until reality comes crashing in. She set down her mug with careful precision. People like me don't get fairy tale endings, Ethan. What kind of person are you? The question came out sharper than he intended. Sophia's laugh held no humor. The kind with secrets that would destroy this perfect life you've built for us. She turned to leave, then paused. You should open that email from James. The one you've been avoiding all day. The revelation that she knew about the email hit him like a physical blow. How did you? Because I know people like James. Like your board members. They see me as a threat to be investigated. She didn't turn around. And maybe they're right. Later that night, Ethan stood in the doorway of the twins' room, watching them sleep. The boy had kicked off his blanket again. The girl clutched her stuffed elephant. They looked so peaceful, so innocent of the adult complications swirling around them. His phone buzzed, another message from James. Have you read it yet? We need to discuss next steps. Next steps. As if this were just another business problem to solve, another risk to mitigate. But as he watched the twins sleep, Ethan realized that standard business solutions couldn't apply here. This wasn't about protecting assets or managing liability. This was about family, complicated, messy, real family. In her room, Sophia held Jasmine's paper, staring at the phone number scrawled across it. One call could solve her immediate problems. Kenny had connections, resources. He'd always taken care of his own for a price. The familiar pull of the past tugged at her, promising quick solutions wrapped in permanent consequences. The sound of Ethan's footsteps in the hallway made her crumple the paper, shoving it into her pocket. Tomorrow would force decisions. Tonight, she just wanted to hold on to this borrowed piece of paradise for a few hours more. The law office of Morrison and Associates occupied the entire 47th floor of a downtown skyscraper. Ethan sat across from James Morrison, watching his oldest friend and attorney shuffle through papers with uncharacteristic hesitation. The morning sun cast long shadows across the mahogany desk between them. The trust fund documentation is straightforward, James began, his voice carefully neutral. We can set up separate accounts for both twins, regardless of paternity. The more complex issue is custody. He paused, adjusting his glasses. Given Sophia's background, we need to consider all contingencies. Ethan's jaw tightened. What exactly does that mean? It means that if things go south, we need to protect your interests. The background check revealed some concerning elements. James slid a folder across the desk. Chicago wasn't just a rough patch in her life, Ethan. There were serious criminal implications. Before Ethan could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Reynolds. The twins are asking for you. They won't nap without their story. Attached was a photo of both children clutching their favorite books, lower lips trembling in identical pouts. The contrast between their innocent needs and the cold legal discussions struck him physically. Across town, Sophia faced her own demons. She'd agreed to meet Jasmine at their old diner, the kind of place where the coffee was always burnt and the waitresses never asked questions. The vinyl booth squeaked as she sat down. Kenny wants to meet, Jasmine said without preamble. Says he's got proof about Chicago. About what really happened with the twins. Sophia's hands shook as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. He's lying. He always lies. Maybe. But he's also desperate. 3 years inside changed him. Jasmine leaned forward. He's talking about going to the press. Imagine how that would play. Billionaire's new girlfriend's criminal past exposed. The twins' real story splashed across headlines. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Sophia, though, tea about the life she built with Ethan, about the twins finally having stability. One headline could shatter it all. What does he want? What Kenny always wants, money. Enough to disappear permanently. Jasmine slid a napkin across the table with a number written on it. The amount made Sophia's stomach turn. Back at the mansion, Ethan found himself in the twins' playroom, surrounded by the evidence of their growing lives. Crayon drawings covered the walls, stick figures of what they considered their family. Ethan, Sophia, Mrs. Reynolds, even the gardener who let them help plant flowers. Their world was simple, uncomplicated by adult complexities. His phone buzzed again. James, following up. We need to discuss protective measures. The press will eventually catch wind of this situation. Ethan began typing a response, then deleted it. Instead, he opened his photo gallery, scrolling through months of memories. The twins' first time in the pool, gripping his hands with complete trust. Sophia teaching them to make cookies, flour dusting all their faces. Christmas morning, wrapping paper everywhere, joy unmarred by questions of genetics or legal standing. The sound of the front door closing pulled him from his reverie. Sophia's footsteps echoed through the house, different from her usual confident stride. He found her in the kitchen, staring out the window at nothing. Where were the twins? She asked without turning.
Napping.
Finally, Mrs. Reynolds had to read Goodnight Moon 3 times. Sophia nodded, still not looking at him. I've been thinking about their future, about what they'll need. I've been meeting with James about that, Ethan said, watching her carefully. Setting up trusts, planning for education. No, Sophia interrupted, finally turning to face him. I mean what they'll really need. Safety. Stability. A life without shadows from the past threatening to destroy everything. The weight of unspoken words filled the space between them. Ethan thought about the folder in James's office, about the secrets it contained. Sophia thought about Kenny's threats, about the price of silence. Whatever's coming, Ethan said slowly, we can face it together. Sophia's smile held more sadness than joy. Some things you can't fix with money or good intentions, Ethan. Some mistakes follow you forever. Before he could respond, Mrs. Reynolds appeared in the doorway. The twins are awake. They're asking for both of you. They moved toward the stairs together, muscle memory carrying them toward their children. But with each step, both felt the growing weight of decisions that would soon need to be made, decisions that could either strengthen their fragile family or shatter it completely. The community center's annual fundraiser transformed its usual sparse interior into something almost magical. Christmas lights twinkled overhead, and children's artwork decorated the walls. Sophia stood near the refreshment table, watching Ethan work the room. He moved between community leaders and local residents with growing ease, his billion-dollar smile replaced by something more genuine. The twins played with other children in a supervised corner, their designer clothes indistinguishable from their playmates in the chaos of childhood activity. Sophia remembered her own childhood in a similar community center, before life had shown her its harder edges. The memory brought both comfort and pain. Marcus Johnson approached her, his expression softer than during their last encounter. I've been watching you too, he said, nodding toward Ethan. Maybe I was wrong about him. He's trying, Sophia replied, carefully neutral. That's more than most do. Marcus paused, studying her face. But you're still holding back. I can see it in your eyes. Same look you had when you first came to us, running from something. Before she could respond, Deshaun Williams took the makeshift stage. The young activist had become an unexpected bridge between Ethan's world and the community. Tonight isn't just about raising money, he announced. It's about building real connections, about understanding that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves. Ethan stood at the back of the crowd, absorbing the words. 6 months ago, he would have heard them as idealistic platitudes. Now he understood them as fundamental truths. His phone buzzed in his pocket, another message from James about the mounting legal complications, but for once, he ignored it. The evening progressed with speeches, local performances, and the kind of genuine community interaction that no amount of corporate philanthropy could manufacture. Sophia found herself drawn into conversations with women she'd known from her harder days. Their initial wariness gave way to cautious acceptance as they saw her engage with the community, not as Ethan's plus one, but as someone who remembered their struggles. Your little ones have grown so much, Mrs. Washington, the center's oldest volunteer, remarked. They look like they belong everywhere now, here and in that big house of yours. The observation struck Sophia deeply. The twins did seem to navigate both worlds with ease, unlike their mother, who still felt caught between them. She watched them play, their laughter mixing with the sounds of the community that had once been her only safety net. Ethan appeared at her side, loosening his tie. "Deshawn wants to discuss expanding the after-school program," he said. "He has some interesting ideas about combining academic support with cultural education." "You're different here," Sophia observed. "More real." "I feel more real here." He watched the twins playing. "My father would say I'm going native, losing sight of who I am. But maybe I'm finally figuring that out." A commotion near the entrance drew their attention. Two men in suits, James's investigators, Sophia realized with a jolt, stood awkwardly in the doorway. Their presence, so obviously out of place, sent ripples through the crowd. Ethan tensed beside her, clearly recognizing them as well. "We should go," he said quietly, "before they make a scene." The drive home was silent, heavy with unspoken questions. The twins fell asleep in their car seats, innocent to the tension between the adults. At a red light, Ethan finally spoke. "James thinks he's protecting me. Protecting us. Is that what you believe?" Sophia's voice was barely audible. "I believe that fear makes people do things they think are necessary." He glanced at her. Fear of loss, fear of change, fear of the unknown. "And what are you afraid of?" The light turned green, but Ethan didn't immediately accelerate. "I'm afraid of letting other people's fears destroy something real." That night, after putting the twins to bed, they stood on the mansion's balcony. The community center's neighborhood was visible in the distance, its lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Two worlds, connected by fragile bridges of understanding and trust. "We can't keep ignoring what's coming," Sophia said finally. "Kenny, the investigators, the press, they won't just go away." "No," Ethan agreed. "But we can face them on our terms, not theirs." The weight of secrets pressed against them both, Sophia's past in Chicago, the truth about the twins, the mounting pressure from all sides. Yet somehow, standing there together, the burden felt more manageable, if not lighter. The morning of the DNA test results arrived with unnatural clarity, as if the universe had decided to make every detail sharp and memorable. Ethan found himself in his study before dawn, watching the sun rise over perfectly manicured grounds that suddenly felt meaningless compared to the weight of the envelope on his desk. Dr. Chen's office had called yesterday. The results were ready. Sophia hadn't slept either. She sat in the twins' room all night, watching them breathe, murmur, eying their faces. The boy had Ethan's habit of furrowing his brow in sleep. The girl's fingers twitched as she dreamed, just like her mother's. How much of what we see in children comes from biology, and how much from love? The question haunted her as morning crept closer. Mrs. Reynolds arrived early, sensing the gravity of the day. She moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, preparing everyone's favorites: blueberry pancakes for the twins, strong coffee for Ethan, chamomile tea for Sophia. The normality of her routine provided an anchor in the storm of uncertainty. "Whatever happens," Mrs. Reynolds said softly as she handed Sophia her tea, "those children know who loves them." The older woman's eyes held decades of wisdom about family bonds that transcended blood. The drive to Dr. Chen's office felt endless. Ethan and Sophia sat in the back of the town car, the twins safely with Mrs. Reynolds at home. Neither spoke, but their hands found each other halfway there, holding on with desperate strength. Dr. Chen's office looked exactly the same as it had weeks ago, the same generic artwork on walls, the same faint antiseptic smell, the same gentle hum of medical equipment in the background. But now it felt like a courtroom where their family's fate would be decided. "Before we open the results," Dr. Chen began, her voice professionally neutral, "I want to remind you both that genetic connection is just one aspect of family bonds. Many successful families—" "Please," Sophia interrupted, her voice raw. "We just need to know." Dr. Chen nodded, opening the envelope with careful precision. The rustle of papers seemed deafening in the silent room. Ethan's grip on Sophia's hand tightened as the doctor began to read. "The results indicate." Dr. Chen paused, looking between them. That Mr. Hawthorne is the biological father of one of the twins, Marcus. For Sarah, the results show no genetic connection. The words landed like physical blows. Sophia's free hand went to her mouth, stifling a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Ethan sat perfectly still, his face unreadable. This is relatively common in cases of superfecundation, Dr. Chin continued, her voice seeming to come from very far away. It occurs when two different men father twins, Ethan finished flatly. Years of business training kept his voice steady, even as his world tilted on its axis. The drive home was silent, but different from the morning's quiet anticipation. This silence had weight, had teeth. It filled the car with unspoken questions and accusations. Sophia stared out the window, tears rolling silently down her face. Ethan looked straight ahead, his jaw clenched, so tight it must have hurt. They found Mrs. Reynolds reading to the twins in the library. Sarah sat in her lap, while Marcus sprawled on the floor, both completely absorbed in the story. The scene, so normal, so precious, made Sophia's knees buckle. Ethan caught her elbow, steadying her automatically, then seemed to realize what he was doing and let go. Mrs. Reynolds, Ethan's voice was carefully controlled. Could you take the children to the park? We need to talk. Once they were alone, the mansion's spacious rooms felt too small, too confining. They ended up in the kitchen, neutral territory where they'd shared so many moments of domestic peace. Now it felt like a battlefield. Did you know? Ethan asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I suspected. Sophia's answer hung in the air between them. There were two men back then, one night apart. It was a dark time. And you didn't think this was something I should know? The careful control in his voice cracked slightly. Before I fell in love with him, before I started planning our future, would it have made a difference? Sophia turned to face him fully. Would you have loved them less? Loved me less? The question stripped away his business facade, leaving emotion beneath. I don't know, he admitted, but I deserve the choice. The aftermath of the DNA test transformed the mansion into a maze of avoided encounters and careful silences. Ethan threw himself into work, spending long hours in his study, with the door closed. Sophia focused on the twins with almost frantic intensity, as if trying to memorize every moment before it could be taken away. Mrs. Reynolds moved between them like a ghost, maintaining routines that felt increasingly hollow. The truth about Sarah's paternity hung between them like an invisible wall, growing thicker with each passing day. The twins, too young to understand the adult complexities around them, sensed the tension and responded with increased clinginess and nighttime tears. One evening, while Sophia sat in the garden watching the twins play, her phone buzzed with a text from Jasmine. Kenny knows about the DNA test. He's making moves. Time's running out. The message sent ice through her veins, making her hands shake so badly she nearly dropped the phone. Inside his study, Ethan stared at his own screen, reading an email from James that would shatter what remained of their fragile peace. DNA results confirm what we suspected, but there's more. The Chicago connection, it goes deeper than we thought. She's not who you think she is. Attached was a police report from 15 years ago, detailing a case that connected the Hawthorne family to a series of events Sophia had been involved in. The coincidence was too precise to be accident, too painful to be chance. Ethan felt the floor shift beneath him as he realized the implications. That night, after the twins were asleep, the confrontation finally came. Sophia found Ethan in the kitchen, a glass of untouched scotch in front of him and printed documents spread across the island counter. When were you going to tell me? His voice was quiet but carried the weight of betrayal. About Chicago? About how you knew exactly who I was before we ever met. Sophia's heart stopped. Ethan, I can explain. Explain what? He pushed one of the documents toward her. How you were involved in the scandal that destroyed my uncle's company. How you knew my family's history before you ever stepped foot in that shelter. Was any of this real, or was it all part of some long con? It wasn't like that. Tears streamed down Sophia's face. Yes, I knew who you were. Yes, I was involved in Chicago. But meeting you at the shelter, that was chance. Everything that happened after was real. Real. Ethan's laugh held no humor. Like Sarah's paternity. Like your convenient appearance in my life, just when I was looking to start a family? You think I planned this? Sophia's voice rose despite her effort to stay calm. You think I wanted to fall in love with someone whose family I helped destroy? To watch my children love a man who might reject them once he knew the truth. The word love hung in the air between them, its weight almost physical. Ethan pushed away from the counter, running his hands through his hair in frustration. I don't know what to believe anymore. Every time I think I understand, there's another layer of lies. Not lies, Sophia corrected softly. Just truths I was too afraid to tell. The truth about Sarah's father. The truth about Chicago. The truth about why your uncle's company really failed. Ethan froze. What do you mean? Your uncle wasn't the victim in Chicago, Ethan. He was the mastermind. I was just a teenager he used as a pawn in his scheme. When it all fell apart, he made sure people like me took the blame while he walked away clean. The revelation hit Ethan like a physical blow. Memories of his uncle, the family hero, the successful businessman, the man he'd idolized, shifted and reformed into something darker. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I was afraid. Sophia's voice cracked. Afraid of losing this life we've built. Afraid of what Kenny might do if he knew I was talking. Afraid of... A cry from upstairs interrupted her. Sarah's voice, high and frightened, calling for both of them. They moved automatically, parental instincts overriding personal drama. Racing up the stairs together, they found both twins awake and crying, reaching for comfort with complete trust in their parents' ability to make everything right. As they soothed their children back to sleep, the weight of their unfinished conversation pressed against them. But something else was there too. The undeniable reality of the family they'd become, regardless of DNA or past mistakes. The anonymous message arrived on Ethan's phone at midnight, a series of photographs showing a much younger Sophia with his Uncle Robert, followed by documents that would change everything. He sat in his darkened study, the blue light of his phone's screen illuminating the truth he'd been circling for months. The photographs told a story that stretched back 15 years. Sophia, barely more than a child herself, standing in his uncle's office. More photos followed, board meetings, handshakes with men he recognized as his father's business associates, and finally, the damning evidence of his uncle's criminal enterprise. But it wasn't just about financial fraud anymore. The documents revealed a deeper betrayal that touched both their lives. Sophia found him there at dawn. The evidence spread across his desk. She didn't seem surprised. Kenny sent those, didn't he? Her voice was steady, despite the fear evident in her eyes. He always said he'd reveal everything eventually. Why didn't you tell me the whole truth? Ethan's voice cracked with exhaustion and emotion. About how my uncle used you. About how my father covered it all up. Because the truth would destroy both our families. Sophia sank into the chair across from him. Your uncle didn't just steal money, Ethan. He stole lives. He took vulnerable kids like me, gave us glimpses of a better life, made us trust him, and then used us in his schemes. When it all fell apart, your father orchestrated the cover-up to protect the Hawthorne name. The weight of generational privilege and corruption pressed down on Ethan's shoulders. And now, why come back into my life? I didn't plan to. When I saw you at the shelter, I almost ran. Sophia's hands twisted in her lap. But then you looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time in my life, someone with power saw me as a person, not a tool to be used. A cry from upstairs interrupted them, the twins awakening to a new day, unaware of the revelations reshaping their world. The sound seemed to break something in Ethan. He pushed back from his desk, running his hands through his hair. Do you know what these documents really show? He turned his laptop toward her. My uncle didn't just use you. He's Marcus's father. That's why the DNA test showed a partial match to me. We share enough genetic material to register as family. The truth landed like a thunderbolt. Sophia's face went pale. That's impossible. He never. The dates match. The genetic markers confirm it. Ethan's voice was gentle now, despite his own turmoil. "He took everything from you, Sophia. Your youth, your trust, and then your child." Tears streamed down Sophia's face as 15 years of buried trauma surfaced. "I blocked so much out from that time. I was so young, so desperate to believe someone cared." She broke off, covering her face with her hands. Ethan moved around the desk, kneeling beside her chair. "Listen to me. None of this was your fault. You were a child, and the men who should have protected you, my uncle, my father, all of them, they failed. They failed you, they failed their own families, they failed basic human decency." Upstairs, the twins' voices grew more insistent. Their normal morning routine continued, unchanged by the earthquakes of truth shaking their parents' world. Sophia wiped her eyes, starting to rise, but Ethan caught her hand. "We need to decide what to do with this information," he said softly. "Kenny's trying to blackmail us, but he doesn't realize these documents damn him too. He was part of my uncle's inner circle." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we stop running from the truth. All of it." Ethan stood, still holding her hand. "We take these documents to the authorities. We expose everything, my uncle's crimes, my father's cover-up, Kenny's involvement. We protect our children by bringing all of it into the light." "It would destroy your family's reputation," Sophia warned. "Everything the Hawthorns built was built on lies and the exploitation of people like you." Ethan's voice hardened with conviction. "Maybe it's time for the Hawthorne legacy to be something different, something honest." The twins' calls grew more urgent. Together, they climbed the stairs to their children's rooms. Sarah and Marcus sat in their beds, reaching for them with complete trust and love. In that moment, looking at their family, complicated, wounded, but real, both Ethan and Sophia knew what they had to do. Later that day, they sat together in the district attorney's office, the documents spread before them. As they began their statement, Ethan held Sophia's hand, feeling the strength in her grip. They were no longer victim and savior, no longer divided by class or race or past mistakes. They were partners, facing the truth together, building something new from the ashes of old lies. And somewhere in the mansion, Mrs. Reynolds read stories to their children, who knew nothing of DNA tests or family legacies or the complexities of adult love. They knew only that they were loved, completely and without condition, by parents who had chosen truth over comfort, healing over hiding, and love over fear. The Hawthorne name would mean something different now. Something built on honesty, justice, and the kind of love that transcends blood and background. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Those don't exist in the real world. But it was something better, a true story about two people who found each other across every divide and chose to build something real together, no matter the cost.